Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast and the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today as I continue on my path, of which I cannot necessarily see, but it feels really good. And my guest today is a cat who came up under the tutelage of his father, Vaughn Freeman, and learned to feel the music because of countless endeavors on the bandstand, always trying to increase the vocabulary of melodic improvisation. He continues to do it today. Chico Freeman, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Chico, can you talk to the audience about the first time? I mean, I think it's very important now. A lot of the rules of engagement have changed. A lot of people believe in their own truths. But let's make it clear. We all come from the motherland. We all come from Africa. That is where we originally are from. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your first experience going over there. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the playing context, but it's the idea of going there and realizing that it was the beginning of civilization.
Well, my first, actually, I think the very first time I went to Africa, I went to North Africa. I was in Morocco. That was actually the very first time that I went. Since then, I've been to Algeria, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Congo, and South Africa. And needless to say, I mean, it was quite an experience. Actually, what's interesting, people tend to think of Africa as a country somehow, but Africa is a continent, not a country. It's a continent with many countries in it. And each country, has its own, has its cultural and everything, its own culture. Sorry, and that's kind of an interesting thing when you go there and you see that. However, you can tell that it's all the well that it sprung from comes right from there, from the center part. So, the experience I had when I first went there, I had the opportunity to play music with so many different kinds of African musicians, from the Ghanaian musicians in Morocco to these Ayeko drummers in Ghana, which was incredible. So, talking about that we all come from there, that's true. We all come from Africa. It's the birthplace of civilization of us.
Well, I mean, it's been at 38 years old. It's been revelatory. I don't read a lot. I do primary source interviews. I talk to Ahmad Jamal. Cats like him wouldn't go play in South Africa because of apartheid. But, he's going to residencies at universities in North Africa. These are the first universities. I interviewed a bass player. What I'm trying to get at is I just interviewed a bass player who's, real hot and heavy in the jam band circuit. His name is Oteil Burbridge, and he's talking to me about, he started playing. He's multi-instrumentalist. He was playing the banjo, and he was playing flat and Scruggs stuff. And then all of a sudden, his friends were like, "Yo, the banjo comes from Africa." And, people need to get a hold of themselves and get their history straight. And most importantly, understand that the roots of melodic improvisation come from the homeland. You want to talk about European classical music as part of jazz is fine. Without the African rhythms, without diaspora, it would never have happened. And I just think that I could not ask. I have a picture of you randomly. I found this album, in a thrift store here in Tucson, and there was inside the cover, there was like this fold out poster of you. And I have it taped over my record player. Both my daughters are always like, "Who is that guy?" I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna talk to him hopefully soon." So I just feel like it's really important for you to.
What album is this?
Well, it was an indie. I'm gonna have to go. It was called.
Kings of Mali.
Yes. Yes.
The Kings of Mali.
Kings of Mali, and you're looking fantastic. But I mean, I taped the poster up right next to a picture of both my daughters. I don't know why, but what I'm getting at is I want to know how you ultimately. There were no jazz curriculums when you were coming up. You were making up the rules, and those rules came from the roots of the motherland. And I just want you to riff on that. Whatever is coming in your mind, you just go on that.
All right, well, now I think I understand what you were talking about. That question before was a little.
Well, I mean,
experience in Africa.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the Jake Feinberg show. So yeah, no, you're gonna get it.
I see. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, I was in African music long before I got to New York. And the Kings of Mali was one of the first records I did that dealt with that. But prior to that, in Chicago, I mean, being a member of the AACM, and we were very involved in the African roots of music, of our music. And my studies in history and ethnomusicology, which, take me when you go back through slavery and prior to slavery, as we know that, at least over here, the African brought its form of music in all of these elements that we use today in all forms of music. And this music predates European classical music and European music in general. But, for example, as you mentioned about the banjo, the string instruments, not just the banjo, but all string instruments began in Africa. That was the beginning of the string instruments. They were invented there. And when I did the Kings of Mali, of course, I did research on that when I was doing the music. And those two kings, Mansa Kankan Musa, and they came from Timbuktu, which was the first place to have universities and libraries. Timbuktu, the original ones were there. So, yeah, all of that history and stuff like that, of course, because African civilization predates European civilization. People like to think of the Greeks often as the beginning of civilization, but the Africans and the Chinese, in fact, are before that, before the Greeks.
That's right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. Continue.
So that's history. That's history. So, yes, of course. And with respect to America, jazz, as we know it, I really hate that word. But,
we're not going to. It's called melodic. Melodic improvisation.
Well, there's so many. Duke Ellington liked to refer to it as African American classical music, and he had a logical reason for that. He spoke of it with classical meaning. In its definition, is music that withstands time, the test of time. And so this music, jazz, was created by African Americans. And it was a mix of the Africanisms that were brought over from Africa during slavery, the call and response, the pentatonic scales, the blues, all of these things which came directly, the spirituals and gospel music, all of that came through the field hollers and the music that was developed during that time. Then you add some of the instruments, European instruments, like, for example, the trap drum set. That I think Sid Catlett was the first one to play that, but it was an invention of. It took European marching band instruments like the bass drum, the tom tom, and snare, and the multiple drum set, as Max Roach would refer to it, was put together by an African American, and that was the invention of what we now refer to as the trap drum set. Cymbals, all of these things came, but the history of the drum predated that because Africa was all of the drums are logs from trees, in fact, and those rhythms which came from Africa. So jazz is a combination of African music and some European harmonies, because obviously we were here and we were, trying to assimilate. And we took and influences came from here and mixed them with our Africanisms, and that's how I think that's how the music developed as early as spirituals to blues and gospel and further on. and even into ragtime, which was kind of the first written classical version of jazz, so to speak, in that manner. Scott Joplin and people like that.
Talking to Chico Freeman here on the Jake Feinberg Show. I mean, I don't think I'm so happy you just talked about the trap set being an African invention, or that was actually African American invention.
It's an African American invention.
And who was the cat that maybe you think first played the trap set? What was his name? Sid what?
Sid Catlett.
Sid Catlett. Now.
Yeah, Max Roach. I learned a lot of this from Max Roach and Newhall Richard Abrams. And Max Roach has done extensive study in this, particularly because Max Roach liked to refer to the drum kit as a multiple percussion instrument. That's how he referred to it.
Okay, so I want to. This is going to be classic stuff. Did you ever gig or play with the pianist Richard Wyans?
No, I didn't.
Do you know?
Well, yes, I did. Sorry.
Okay. You know,
I did. I did.
Yeah. So
I did. It was when I first came to New York years ago. I played with him with. I'm thinking Mickey Bass was on bass. Yeah, I seem to remember. I did play with him. Yes.
Okay, because I did an interview with him a couple years ago, and the guy's he's a badass, and he said he lived in Berkeley, and he went to San Francisco State, and I'm quoting him here. He goes, "I went there with some of my musical friends like Jerome Richardson and Cal Jader, and there was no jazz department at San Francisco State. Some of the musicians, including myself, Jerome, Cal, Paul Desmond, talked the faculty into having some kind of jazz studies curriculum course. That's how it started." And you went to, it says here, you went to Northwestern in 1967. And
yes.
I just want to know if you talked, because this is the whole point, is that how are you supposed to create additional vocabulary to African-American classical music or just music in general if it's being, it's being developed within academia? And I was hoping you could talk about the balance that existed at that time, because let's face it, you were making up the rules at that time.
Well, the thing is, okay, let me put it to you this way. People tend to think that jazz started in the school somehow, or that, the education of jazz. But you see, before I went to college, I went to the University of the Streets. Like my father did, like Charlie Parker did, like Duke Ellington did, and Max Roach. And we talked about that. We learned a certain way, which was not the way they teach in schools. What they did in school is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's like trying to put the way it began trying to teach. First of all, there was no jazz education in the schools, in any schools anywhere. And I remember seeing, I believe it was Rahsaan Roland Kirk, Freddie Hubbard, walk on the Tonight Show, sort of walk on, and they were talking about trying to put jazz in the schools. Now, there was that movement trying to get jazz put in the schools. I think many of us didn't realize what was going to happen in trying to do that. And one of the things that happened is that they tried to fit a square peg into a round hole. You see, I believe it's the arrogance of the system, or of the people that think that everything has to fall into the same musical context as European classical music, in the sense that the way you are taught classical music in school is also not the way that Bach and Beethoven played and learned. Bach used to improvise, but the schools have sort of dampened that. In the teaching of classical music, they tried to apply those systems to the learning and teaching of jazz. And that's like putting, like I said, a square peg in a round hole. If you do that, a lot of stuff is going to slip through a lot of cracks there. And that's what happened. You see, the University of the Streets produced people like Charlie Parker. It produced Max Roach, Eric Dolphy. It produced John Coltrane and Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong and so many others. And it appears to me that system of study is pretty good. It worked. I mean, look at the results. Look at who it produced. And as a result, I studied first in the streets. I know both ways. I learned the school system, and I also grew up with my father and my uncles in the household and playing with those guys in Chicago and everyone else. And I also went to the University of the Streets. And with regard to that, there are a lot of things that are thought of and done completely differently. than they are expressed in school. I'll give you an example, a small example of something. In the schools, they teach you that a sharp 11, when you talk about a dominant chord with a sharp 11. Now, when I grew up, we didn't talk about it as a sharp 11. We called it a flat 5. Now, it's the same note. But what's the difference between a sharp 11 and a flat 5? Sharp, psychologically, and it indicates brightness. It indicates upward movement. But flat indicates downward movement, and it indicates a darker sound. It's the blue note. So therefore, you don't talk about the blues in terms of a sharp 11. The blues has a flat 5. And psychologically speaking, and just imagery, makes the feeling when you play that completely different than if you're talking about I'm playing a G7 sharp 11. It's a G7 with a flat 5. And that's a small difference, but it's a major concern. It's a small thing, but it's a major difference. And those are just some of the things. I mean, there are quite a few things more that the way the language that was used that I learned and how it was discussed and how it was expressed. Because the truth is that this music that we refer to as jazz is a music of self-expression. And that is the main thing. It's about self-expression. It's a mirror into our souls, and it's a mirror into our environment, and it's about how we see the world. It's self-expression. So every person that picks up an instrument and plays is about expressing themselves. And in doing that, the way you project things and discuss things and talk about things, the language that you use in order to project yourself is very important in terms of how you get that emotion across to other people.
Yeah,
that's just one example.
Yeah, no, I was hoping you could talk. I want you to go a little bit deeper. I mean, here's a cat that you've collaborated with, Cecil McBee. You know, I interviewed him a few years ago. He said with Pharoah Saunders, the music was always unfolding because you were at liberty to most certainly be who you are musically. There was no predetermination to play anything. There was just a strong need to express yourself in terms of who you are at the time as an individual who would be or could be aware of what was happening around you, and people were evolving at that time with some quality of respect. And so my question is, Chico, can you talk about a time on the bandstand with your dad or with the sages of the music where, because ultimately this is about managing your ego and allowing other people to be themselves and be part of the conversation. I was just hoping you could talk about a time when you were emboldened on stage by the.
Well, you used the word emboldened, but I would have to refer to a particular time when I was with Dizzy Gillespie, and we were playing. We went to Cuba. In fact, we were playing in Cuba, and they asked us to do an interview together. So Dizzy and I did an interview together. And one of the question was what is jazz? Which at that time people were always asking that. Once again,
they're still asking. Yeah, it has never changed.
Yeah, I know. And Dizzy and I came up with this. Well, Dizzy said it's the search for truth. And what you just spoke of with relating to your interview with Cecil and Pharoah, the search for truth. Now, what is truth? In this case, what we're talking about is truth is who one is at the moment, at that moment. Which you just said that. These are words that you just used. It's the truth of who one is at that moment. And that's the truth, because as you know that saying, the past is gone, the future, tomorrow never comes, and we're only left with the present. The present is the only thing that's real. And at the moment, that's the search for truth. So when you're playing the expression of oneself in that search for who you are at that moment, but it's within a group context, and it means that we all are expressing ourselves on the bandstand, and at the same time maintaining respect for each other's right to express oneself and have conversation, and not become overbearing. And that is exactly what you're talking about. And that's why jazz is is really, I think, a model for the way the world should exist, the way governments should exist. The acceptance, because first you have to accept yourself, and then you have to accept others and their right and their viewpoint. And when you're doing that on the bandstand, that's what you have. You have mutual respect, mutual acceptance, and global acceptance from, from within that context that you're operating from. And you're listening, and that's what we want. We want to hear that. And that's the thing about this music. For example, you never could get ahead or get anywhere in the community by the, on the streets or with the cat if you sounded like someone else.
Right.
So you want to say how is it, whereas the schools made everybody coming out sounding the same, like copies.
That's right. Tracing paper.
Came out
Tracing
all the saxophone players sounded like Coltrane, or Charlie Parker or whatever. Everybody came out sounding like Herbie or McCoy. And this is the way the schools did that. You see, but that's not valuable in the in the jazz, on the streets. When you grow up, a guy comes, you hear somebody play, and if you come up playing what they just played, or it sounds like somebody, you don't get the respect. It's all about your originality and creativity, and that on the bandstand happened with my dad and I. An example was that we were playing in London, in fact, at Ronnie Scott's. I remember it very well, and I forget the song we were playing, but my father took the first solo, and as he was soloing, he played something, and I was like, "Wow, what is that?" And I went to the back of the stage because I had to catch what he did. I just wanted to find out what it was, and I did. I caught it, and I got it under my fingers what he did. Then it was my turn to solo, and just so I wouldn't lose it, I actually played the thing he played.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh. He never played that again.
No, it's like, that's the idea where you're like, why the heck did you play the same thing I did?
But you know what he did? He grabbed something of mine, and he played that back at me. And I never played that again. So we grabbed something from each other, but once it was Mal Waldron. I was with Mal Waldron for 10 years, and Mal told me that he gave me a very nice compliment. He told me that he really liked my playing because I didn't at that time. There were a lot of kids coming out of school, and they sounded the same. And he was saying what he liked about me was that I had an original sound. I sounded original, and he said that, for example, you could be walking down the street, and if you walked into a place and somebody was playing and you heard them play your stuff, or you heard them playing things that you played, immediately they used to go home and find something else to play. So this is what this originality and trying to, not sounding. I mean, we all copy when we're young in order to learn, but once you pass that stage, and that comes fairly soon, you're looking for your own voice and your own expression, and that's the essence of what this music is about.
What do you believe that the fact that just the trend and the idea that there aren't places, enough venues for people to really try to develop their original sound? I mean, why have we moved so extremely from this period of needing to sound unique? I mean, I talked to 500 cats in 5 years, and what you just said, is Tower of Power's drummer David Garibaldi. He said if someone came up to him after a gig and said, "Man, you sounded great. You sounded just like this cat," he'd be like, "I'm looking for the razor blade." I mean, that's where we were in the late 60s, and now it's about conformity, highly formulaic. Jazz is very classicalized. But outside of the realms of, I don't want to just bash academia, but outside of that, how have we moved from individuality and authenticity and, as you say, truth, to conformity, tracing paper music, and lack of authenticity?
Well, actually, I think things are getting better. Since I've come back to the States and back in New York, there are a slew of new young musicians, and they're starting to sound original. I hear them, and they're playing. I mean, they obviously have their influences, but most of them have gone to school. And since you don't want to bash academia, but it's not bashing it if you're telling the truth. The truth is simply that young people are trained by older people, our parents and our elders. So how has it moved to that place? Is because academia has become important, and for a while back, from the 60s and 70s. In other words, everybody was told you needed to go to school to get a job. And of course, and not speaking only musically, but then one day everybody went to school and came out and found out they couldn't get a job. But and so we're in this place now where a lot of these kids go to school. That's what they do. And since the music has moved, I'm talking about popular music, and the technology and all of that has changed the world, the way things are done. That's why record companies are struggling with selling stuff. Although record companies were the biggest thieves ever. Don't get me started on that.
Believe me, man.
Don't get me started.
I know you went outside the box, because none of the labels you were ever on really ever had anything to do with Western. It was always India Navigation. These other. Anyway, go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So I think our children were steered that way. They were directed into schools. And then once it caught on to having jazz programs, we ended up having jazz programs almost in every major university across the country, and some additional schools, which private, like Berkeley, Berkeley in Boston, which was a music school from the beginning, and not a university like University of Pittsburgh or Northwestern University. But we ended up having jazz in every major university across the country. And kids started going to schools and learning with that system that I just told you about. And as I said, one of the things that got through the cracks with the square peg and the round hole is exactly what you're talking about. Jazz has become more classically oriented in the sense that there's more information for everyone about jazz. The solos are already transcribed.
Right.
They're in a library,
right,
and everyone can go into the library, grab a solo of anybody, and learn it, read it, and practice, and sound just like whomever. This is why it's put in the library now. It's on the internet. It's everywhere, and so. But what's missing, of course, is the apprenticeship thing. The working with guys. It's hard now for young guys. Like when I came up, I got to work with Elvin Jones and McCoy Tyner. I got to work with Jack DeJohnette. I got to do stuff with Barry Harris and John Hicks and those people around, Art Blakey. And so, and others, you look at the guys, people before me that came before me that got to work with their mentors, Miles and Buhena and all of that. This was like an apprenticeship thing. This is where you learn, and how you learned on the bandstand, one of the methods. And when you got to New York, well, see, it's less of that going on. A lot of these young kids have to come out, and they don't have the opportunity to play with so-called jazz stars anymore. They're gone. So they're stuck with the library at their university and playing with each other for the most part. A few of them, like I have some young guys playing with me now, and so, there are a few of us still around, but still, that, I believe, is one of the things. The other thing is, this is not the popular music anymore like it used to be. It's not as popular as it used to be. So therefore, a lot of these kids come out and go right into teaching.
Mm-hmm.
They come out of school, and instead of going out on the road or going out and experiencing playing and everything, they turn around and go right back into school. And what can they teach? They only can teach what they just learned.
Right. I think you're nailing this. I also, Gary Bart's a good friend of the program, and I also wanted to talk to you about this. He maintains that a lot of younger cats, because of the electronic music that has really just been crushed into ears of people for the last 2 or 3 decades, the lack of dynamics. Ultimately, learning your instrument and being able to play every single chord, note, and he says their ears, younger students' ears are locked. Can you riff on that for a minute? The idea that people's ears.
Oh, he's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Tell me about what you think about that.
Well, let me give you an example of something that I do today, every day when I practice, and I've been doing it for a long time. We all know that everybody says you got to play long tones on your instrument, right? If you play a wind instrument. Well, I play long tones, and people very often, now the classical people teach you to play long tones and try to make every note even, that each one sound the same, which I also do that because that's also good to do, technically, be able to control your instrument. But there's something else that I do. I take each note, and I try to play that note every way I can. And what I learned is that each note is different. Each note has a different character. Each note plays softer in a different way, louder in a different way. It articulates in a different way. So what happens is I learn my instrument in a much more intimate way. I also know how to speak and use it as a language because I know this note here, I can bend it a little further than I can this one. So when I want to play something and I want to bend the note to express myself, well, I know I can do it on this one, but but not as much on that one. The other one, I can tongue rapidly or do certain other things. So I take all the phrases, I take each note. Sometimes I play one note the whole day and just play one note every possible way I can play it. So I know that note on my horn. And that goes from dynamics, from very super soft to super loud, and everything in between. And that's how and that takes years and years and years, but that's how you learn your instrument. And that's how you also develop your ears to the other elements of music besides melody, harmony, and rhythm is dynamics. And which a lot of the kids today, they don't have it because of the electronic instruments. There is only one dynamic. And on top of that, if you add the MP3s, where everything is squashed, they don't even hear the dynamics when it's played because I don't know if you know about MP3s and when dynamics are played, you can hear them in vinyl and analog and in WAV files, the high quality files. But since everybody is about quantity rather than quality, and they smash everything, they compress everything in the MP3s and stuff like that, you lose all that dynamic.
I mean, it's not a big deal when I'm talking to Chico Freeman because it's just our voices. But I'm telling you, man, the compacting of the music, really. I mean, I've been talking to a couple of producers in L.A. Who worked with the Mizell brothers and people like that, and they're very sharp, and they're talking about younger. I mean, literally in pop music today. No dynamics, no singers use dynamics at all, none.
Well, they're not trained that way. They don't have it in their ears, and it's because of technology has taken us there. I mean, I could get, I used to.
Hold on, because you know what it is.
I used to produce.
Yeah, go ahead.
As I say, I used to produce audio file recordings. Do you know what an audio file? Audio files are?
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe audience. I guess your audience knows, but. Just a quick definition: audiophile people are people that believe in the truest form of high fidelity, and fidelity meaning faithfulness, and high meaning the high faithfulness. In other words, audiophile people like to hear music as if it's being played for you in your living room, and they want all the character and quality that you get out of every instrument. They want to be able to hear that. And when the digital world came in, analog. The digital world took that away. The quality, it changed. CDs and everything, people were told that was an advancement, but it actually wasn't. It set music back a lot in terms of the actual quality of music. Anyway, audiophile people stayed with it. They used to listen only to vinyl and the highest quality audio equipment that they could get. So I used to produce records for that. And no processing. That was a no-no. No going in and using reverbs, artificial reverbs and digital reverbs and all that. The reverbs came from the places where we played. So we would maybe record things in a church or in certain rooms. Now, the digital world, they have copies of these rooms. They have software that mimics and these rooms, and you can apply them through the computer. But audiophiles don't do that. They want the real thing, a real room, and how it sounds in that room. So with that kind of thing, your ears become finely tuned, and the emotion that is expressed, especially with a master of an instrument, one who knows how to express, who uses his or her instrument to really express oneself, and using all of those tools that are available to you in terms of the dynamics and everything's phrasing and articulation and all of these things. These things. That's why music is a language. That's why music touches people and reaches out to their emotions. And those are the reasons. Whereas today, much of the pop music, rock music, pop music, all of this is one level, one volume, squashed to high heaven, and there are no dynamics. But kids are used to hearing it that way, so they miss all of that.
Can you talk about where you believe where your ears grew the most in your career early on?
I'd have to say when my dad used to have rehearsals at home.
How would that?
I listened to my father practice hours upon hours. My father had practiced 8 to 10 hours every day, and I grew up listening to him doing that. He'd be in his room and he'd be practicing. And honestly, at that time, I didn't find it pleasant because what he was practicing was was not in a musical context. By that I mean he was going through scales and whatever else he was working on. And without a musical context to have that, it was just practicing to me. But when he had his rehearsals, which he had at our house, on my block, we had about 25 kids that lived on my block. We had a lot of kids on my block. And whenever my dad had rehearsals, particularly in the summertime, because we'd open the doors and the windows because it was hot and we didn't have air conditioning back then. And he would have the band come over, my Uncle Bruz, the drummer, my Uncle George, the guitarist, Andrew Hill, or sometimes Ahmad Jamal, the piano player.
Oh, yeah.
Either Malachi Favors or Don Baltus. What's his name? Leroy Vinegar on bass. These are names I remember back then.
Wow.
And they would come into my house, and our house, as you say, and they would rehearse. And the whole neighborhood would be sitting on our porch. Kids. My mom would make lemonade, and just we'd have a little party outside, and they would just sit there and listen to my dad rehearse. And he was playing jazz and really killing it, But and of course back then, we were listening to the Drifters in school, with our peers, the Drifters, and I guess those guys there. But they also had dynamics, those groups in Motown, a lot of dynamics.
Oh,
but,
yeah. No,
yeah.
No, and that was I talked to M. Tume. I interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and he talked about. I got to go back and look at the exact quote, but I don't know. There was an effort made to take away the we're talking about R&B and soul music, taking away the singers from these groups. And I'm going to get the quote up right here because here we go. He said, record companies have devalued excellence. Today you get praised for sounding like someone. When we were signing up as groups, I'm talking about jazz, funk, R&B, everything had its own sound. Parliament and Funkadelic did not sound like Kool and the Gang. Kool and the Gang did not sound like Slave. Slave didn't sound like the Commodores. Once you consolidate the sound, it's also easier to copy and manipulate it. Take every lead singer, take them out of the group, and that group dies. You give them a solo deal. You remember a group, the Jackson 5? Take the lead singer. What happens?
Yeah.
The group dies.
The Supremes.
That's what he said. He goes, remember a group called the Supremes? Take the lead singer out.
You're
it
still
dies.
reading. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So you're reading his mind, but he goes. Conversely, every white group, you could take the lead singer, but the group didn't die. Genesis, you take the lead singer, the group didn't die. There's been a conscious effort to devalue the excellence of black bands.
Well, you're right.
That's Mtume, by the way.
And Mtume, I agree. Yeah, okay, but I agree with Mtume. And that's absolutely correct because look, when I was let me tell you something. The thing is in America. Oh boy, this whole race thing, boy. Sometimes it's just so tiring.
No, you know what it is, man. But not, you know what? You don't even have to go there. It's just the idea of, we were I think it's just so important because even younger cats, not even my generation, but younger, they don't know where their roots came from. So it might be exhausting, but you have to realize that these excerpts, these stories you tell, when I put them out over new media, if it resonates with 3 people, that exhaustion goes away. So anyway, do what you got to do.
No, I just had to say that because it's like this. The truth is simple. The African American's position in America has always been untenable, and that's a nice way of putting it.
Right.
When it comes to music and black music, white artists have always tried to copy black music, but the problem is, copying isn't the worst part about it. The worst part is they copy it and then they take credit for it. And so Elvis Presley was one of the first guys that came close to sounding like a black first singer. So Elvis became king. And it was like the Great White Hope. It's the same as like boxing when Jack Johnson was fighting. They just kept looking for the white guy that was going to kick this black guy's ass. Just like they did with Muhammad Ali and Joe Louis. And it's the same thing with music. If we talk about the history of music, I read a book where they said Paul Whiteman was the father of jazz. And if anybody read that book, he could play Carnegie Hall, but no black artist could play Carnegie. W.C. Handy was the first one to play Carnegie Hall, and it took how long it took before that happened. Okay, we know all the, we finally got a black president. All right, so all of these achievements happened, but on the way, black music was co-opted, and once it was co-opted, it had to be. White people had to, the way they did it, they needed to copy it. They needed to discover a science in order for, and they're good at it. Japanese actually beat them out in terms of being copied. People that can copy. No one copies better than the Japanese. And,
yeah, you're right. I did. They love them, but they treat. I'm
not saying what they're saying. Their whole MO is different.
Sure.
They don't take credit for it. They're just very good. That's why they made great cars. They make great everything because they know how to copy and get the best out of it and do really well on it. But they are the best at copying. And white people copy, but the problem was they took credit for it. They tried to take credit for it. Dixieland, which was New Orleans style music, became white music. Al Hurt and Pete Fountain, and those guys became the guy. That's what that was, and that's a form of New Orleans music. What Louis Armstrong and Buddy Bolden and those guys did. So it's just that's the history. Now don't get me. I'm not upset at white people in this as a rule. For example, Benny Goodman was one of the best. Was a good guy. He was one of the first to hire African Americans in his band.
Absolutely.
And he was advised against that, told not to do it. But Lionel Hampton and Teddy Wilson, and they part of their success. But Louis Armstrong was best friends with my grandfather. Louis Armstrong came from New Orleans to Chicago and lived with my grandfather, who was a piano player and one of the first black policemen on the Chicago police force. And Louis Armstrong lived with my grandparents. My father grew up listening to Louis Armstrong play duets with his father, my grandfather, at home.
Wow.
And when Louis Armstrong finally got himself situated money-wise, then he joined Benny Goodman's band, and that's when he got together. And then after that, he left and went to Europe, and then he came back to start. But so I know about a lot of this history from a real perspective. And so my point is that, like I said, Benny Goodman, but here Benny Goodman was given the title, the King of Swing. And as good as that guy is, he's not the king of swing. I mean, as nice as he was. Fletcher, almost all of the arrangements that you heard on Benny Goodman's big band arrangements were done by Fletcher Henderson. But it was Benny Goodman who gave him a job, because Fletcher Henderson couldn't keep a band because he was African American and black. He couldn't work because you got to be able to work to keep a big band. So Benny Goodman hired him to do the arrangements for his band. But a lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that at all.
So my point is that, a lot of these things, I mean, Duke Ellington was one of the, Fletcher Henderson came before Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington, and it was hard for Duke to keep a band together, but he did somehow. And as I said, as time goes on, the progress goes on. I mean, I could tell you about politics back then and why that happened. That's another story. We could go into that. But because this whole thing after the Civil War and with Grant and the presidency, which is very reminiscent of what's been going on today with our votes and stuff. We could go into that, but as I say, you probably don't have enough time for that.
No, I'm having such a ball with you, and I think we need to go into it, and we do need to do a set too, because before I let you go, can you just talk a little bit about the new album, and ultimately if there is a new language in the album, conceptually what you tried to do with it?
Well, my new album, Spoken Into Existence, is more of a family thing. I have 5 daughters, and
bless you, brother. That I have 2. That I don't know how you did 5, man. That's because I'm in
5.
trouble. I'm in trouble.
Anyway.
Yeah.
and they all live in different parts of the world. Right. And my daughters, there was a period when I wrote this music and stuff where we all came together, and that was via the technology of today, the internet. And somehow we all came together, and as a result, these girls hooked up. They visited. They literally hooked up on the internet through Facebook and other things, and then they made moves and they met up with each other. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
And this was very inspiring to me because I was at the center of all this. And it was great. I mean, it was wonderful. And so I wrote a song for each of my daughters, and those are 5 songs on this record. Then there was, there's a song I played of Stanley Turrentine's called "Soft Pedal Blues," and you don't grow up in Chicago and not play the blues, and well, maybe somebody does, but
no, it's there. Anyway. It's there. It's all there.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I played with J.B. Huddle and Buddy Guy and Junior Wells, as well as at Queen Bee's and all the blues places.
Oh, that's awesome! We have so much. This is ridiculous. I had no idea you played with the Blues Cats, but of course you are from Chicago.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I'm from Chicago, man. That's the home of the urban blues, bro.
Yeah,
my father, boy, he went through all those blues things too for the earlier guys.
I dig.
Anyway, the thing is that. You learn to play the blues in Chicago. I mean, Lou Rawls and just, So what's happened, what I'm trying to say is there was a Gene Ammon. Now, for the jazz saxophone players, I mean, Chicago saxophone players, they play the blues. And Gene Ammon is one of the best. He's one of the greatest,
Jug.
Hitting the jug. Yeah. And so I got to hear Gene live. I listened to him and Sonny Stitt. And together I heard Don Byers. I grew up listening to some great players and the blues, and as many bluesers and as much of the bluesers that I have played, I realized one day I had never recorded a slow blues. I played a lot of blues. I've recorded some blues, but I never recorded a slow blues. And I don't know why it happened like that, but it became a realization to me. And I heard this song by Stanley Turrentine called "Soft Pedal Blues," and it just touched me, and so I decided to record that blues, a slow blues like that, for that reason. And so there was that, and then the other songs were a couple songs from the guys that were in the band. Antonio Faro, "Black Inside," which is a song of his that I really liked. I recorded that, and the bass player had this beautiful Niskayuna because he was born in the U.S. and he was born in a town called Niskayuna. When I first heard the name Niskayuna, I thought it was a girl, a woman or something,
Mm-hmm.
But it was the name of a city in upstate New York. So, but it's beautiful. So that's how that record came together. It was a personal, I don't know, I guess mostly family and friends and peers, colleagues, and it was just a. And the other thing is I had been working, I played a lot of music. I played a lot of music with the AACM, and I played a lot of music. I played with Cecil Taylor and Sam Rivers and, I'm pulling a lot of let's say harmonically and melodically progressive players. I don't want to use the word avant-garde, but I have played music, the so-called avant-garde music, and I enjoy it and love doing it. But there was a point where I felt that I really wanted to develop my melodic sense, and I took some time out to really work on that because I sort of saw myself like I see myself in some ways sort of like Michael Jordan. And I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but
Sure.
me being from Chicago and Michael Jordan is important. One of the things that Michael Jordan did, there's a few things he do that people ask me who are my major influences, and they probably expect me to say John Coltrane, my father, Duke Ellington, or whatever. And those are true, a lot of them, Dexter Gordon. But there's somebody else that I include in that mix, and that's Michael Jordan. And they say, whoa, why? Because it takes them back. And Michael Jordan and Muhammad Ali, but for the moment, Michael Jordan. And what he did was he came in as a very good player, but he couldn't win anything because he was by himself. And it wasn't until Phil Jackson came in and got Michael calmed down and got him thinking, and that Michael was no good unless he can make his teammates better. So that's one of the things I do with my bands, my groups. I try to make whoever's in my band is about making all of us the best we can be. I don't think in terms of only me. It's my band, I'm the leader, so I have to be, I look for a group. I'm looking for a Super Bowl group or a championship group, and that's a team. And I like to do whatever I can to, like what Duke Ellington did, where he wrote for his people. He wrote specifically for the guys in his band. So I do things like that. I try to increase the strengths and address the strengths of the people that I hire. That's one thing. The other thing,
yeah.
Yes?
No, I was just going to say, I'm short on time here, and I wanted to know.
Oh, okay.
Can we pick this up like a week from today? What's your schedule like? I want to do part 2 with you.
We can do part 2. Part 2 can be done next on the 28th if you like.
Is that same time, week from today?
Same time.
All right, brother. I love you, man. Thank you. Yeah, you're dropping. Thank you for the enlightenment, and we got more to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Cheers, brother.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.